After more than a year working on my Citybuilder, I finally got some game developers to playtest my game for the first time, to find issues I can see for myself as the creator, and to get some valuable feedback. Let's see what they had to say about my game.
Research was how to prevent the sand. Oh, that's not good. That's really not good.
For those who don't know, I'm making a survival city builder in the desert, where you have to fight sandstorms. And before people could playtest, I had to finish my vertical slice. First, I needed a wind condition, thanks to Nice Screen for the idea. The player needs to research and build a big drill that would find an unlimited amount of water in the ground to save the settlement. The drill needs 4 generators to operate, and those generators need a power core each. They can be found in special boxes in the 4 quadrants of the map. Then activate a drill operation that will consume resources over time, and trigger lightning strikes that will disturb the weather, leading to a drastic increase in sandstorms, making for a cool final showdown before victory. One remaining problem was, the food could only be generated from grass tiles, and since the sandstorm could turn those grass tiles into sand, you could end up being soft-locked with not enough grass tiles to be able to progress. So I created a new technology that allows farmers to turn dirt into grass. And I also gave them a little hat. Now that my game has hats, it's time to make it playtest ready. First with some quality of life improvements, like any good city builder, a pause, play, fast forward feature. To better understand civilian decisions, an icon to show that a civilian is walking to work at a building, and little breadcrumbs to show their current path. The thing players do the most in the game is to assign and unassign civilians from buildings. And you could only do that by selecting a building and clicking a button in the UI, which was tedious, so I simply allowed to right-click buildings instead. Now for onboarding. I always rather have new mechanics introduced over time instead of a straight-up tutorial. And the best way I found to do that in a city builder was to have quests. The quests would guide the player and reward them with resources, which also allowed to accelerate the slow resource production of the beginning of a new game, from learning how to play to finally win the game. I also allowed to hide the UI to not clutter the screen. I hate it when a game forces you to read an online wiki to understand how it works. I love that in the Civilization games, there's a wiki directly in the game. So that's what I did. A page for all the concepts, buildings, and unlockable text of the game, for a total of 41 pages, with a search bar and related topics, to make it easier to find information you need. I also made a first pass at French translation to be sure that the search still works in a different language. And with all that available information, I added multiple ways to click in the UI and be brought to a relevant page in the wiki. It also allowed me to make some contextual tutorial pop in case I detect the player is stuck. I also added custom tooltips when hovering for even more contextual information. Time to wrap this up. I created the first pass at the main menu. The game finally has a name: Storm Settlers. The storms are what makes my game different from other city builders, and combined with Settlers, it still sounds like a city builder. On a new game, I added a way to name your city and input the seed for the procedural generation. Then the last big chunk I needed for playtesting was save games. Winning a game can take 2 to 3 hours, so I didn't want to ask playtesters to do that in one sitting. I won't go into the boring details of the implementation, but after a lot of work, players can now save and load at any time during the game, except during sandstorms and the final drill operation. Plus, it will allow me to test features in a more advanced city, and it will also be easier to share some footage of the game that is not always like 30 seconds at the beginning of a new game. Okay, the game is finally ready for some playtesting. After more than a year, some people will finally play it. I'll do the playtest in 2 waves, so the first wave can find the obvious problems that always come up because I made a game and I can't see them. So I can fix them and have a better game for the second wave, that will be able to give me more in-depth feedback. Before I get to the playtesters' feedback, if you have some of your own and just want to be part of this game's community, I have a Discord server that you can join and share your own feedback and get more frequent updates about the game. So I poked a couple of my game dev friends for a first wave of playtesting. Only minutes after the fact, they already started to point out some issues with the camera and the controls, so I started to work right away to fix those. The first big problem the playtester had was with assigning civilians, or the fact that they couldn't. Civilians would only be automatically assigned to the buildings, meaning you would need to unassign them from another building and hope that they would choose to go to the building you wanted. Otherwise, you would need to unassign them again and again until they finally picked the building you wanted. That was obviously a pain in the butt. I made it so that if you right-click on a building without any civilians available, it would unassign one from another building based on how important what they are doing is, or by selecting a civilian directly and right-click on a building like you would do in an RTS game. Of course, playtesters found a way to exploit it, to assign neutral civilians to work for them. As usual...
Oh my god, you. Right. Oh.
The game was too hard. I made civilians consume less food for a day after some died from starvation. I made water tiles always surrounded by dirt, so it's easier to have space to build water collectors before you unlock diggers. To help people understand how walls work, I added icons when placing them that shows the tiles it would protect and from which direction, and made a new wiki page with animated GIF. I also reused that directional icon to show players from which direction the first sandstorm will come from. I revealed the fog of war around the closest patch of water and rock to help players find them. I added neutral walls directly at the beginning to help protect from the first sandstorm and help understand how they work. Players would not understand why they couldn't build or dig on certain spots, so I added pop-up text showing the reason why they can't build, so the players have more information than an annoying sound effect. For the few in the first wave that managed to reach the endgame, you would often need to dig a large chunk of sand to make room for the drill, which could take a lot of time and would be a bit boring. I added a new unlockable tech to allow to upgrade digger buildings, slightly changing their art, and making diggers dig away sand faster, requiring less civilians to do the same job. But the main issue for the first wave of playtesters was to not understand when they didn't have enough food to feed their civilians.
Oh. Why did they die?
They would often build a lot of houses to get a lot of civilians, to then be surprised when most of them would die of starvation, because they never knew there was a problem in the first place before they were harshly punished for it. I made it sure that the UI always shows the daily production of water and food at all time, showing a negative red number when losing food, with a pop-up when food is consumed, showing if the civilians were well fed or if the food is slowly depleting and will eventually lead to losing civilians, so the player has an opportunity to do something about it. With that, I felt the obvious issues of my game were dealt with, and I was ready for a second wave of playtesters, and I broadened my reach to get more in-depth feedback. With the obvious problems out of the way, a lot more people reached the endgame. Some people had a hard time to remember which power core boxes they found in which quadrants of the map, so they wouldn't know where to look for the missing ones. So I made sure that the open box residues would never despawn, and even save them to keep them after reloading the game. There were still frustration about the surprising deaths, especially since assigning tiles to be digged would use water, meaning you could spend all your water right before the civilians would drink for the day, and randomly have a couple of civilians die. So I added a dizzy state to civilians that happens when they lack food or water for the day, and your daily production is fine. You will still lose a day worth of work from them, but they'll be right back up afterward. Some people would make big clumps of buildings which could trap some civilians, leading to terrible performance because of impossible pathfinding always failing, with the civilian retrying again and again. So I added a list of tiles to avoid going to once the pathfinding failed once, so that the civilian would know that it's impossible to reach. Playtesters had a hard time to know how efficient each building was, so I added a UI over the building that will show its daily production, while placing it or selecting it. helping to optimize the production.
Way is the most optimal. I'm gonna min-max your game, bud.
Some players would end up having their camera completely lost in the fog of war, so I added a clickable event that would recenter the camera. Even with the upgraded diggers, it was still tedious to have to micromanage diggers and wait for them to finish digging a tile before you could ask them to dig one tile further. So I allowed to pre-plan the digging. They would still only dig the tile next to land, but now they are able to keep digging further without having the player to micromanage them. The last issue I fixed was players not understanding that some buildings produce stuff automatically while others need some player inputs, like the diggers, tech lab, and explorers. I added an idle state to the building with little sleeping Zeds, when a building is not producing anything or have any job in progress, so the player knows they are wasting the workforce of a civilian that they could assign to a different building instead. I'm super happy about the state of the game now that the playtesters found so many issues and gave me great feedback. Even in that state, I had a lot of positive comments on how they enjoyed playing the game and had fun.
I want to keep playing it. I'm enjoying it. Like, I would keep playing this.
If you'd like to be part of future playtests or simply want to chat about the game, join the Discord linked in the description. I now have a clear idea of how to make the game evolve, and I'll be able to bring the game to Steam in the near future. Stick around and subscribe if you want to follow the production of my game, Storm Settler.